this. But I arrived, and then they said, you have somebody dropped something off for you today. So, wow, what is it? And he gives me a book back, and then I remember that this lady came from London, and there was a book that was translated in London. And so she brought me a few copies, and the title of the book is Thought and Life. So I thought it was pretty amazing because there was actually one of the things that I had read here before that is called Our Will, which I'm going to try to incorporate because it's really interesting, and I really encourage you guys to get this book, whether it's in English or Portuguese, because it's pretty amazing, amazing work that has been done here. Well, our topic, Your Mind, Your Life, is a study that was inspired by an article that I read on the Spiritist magazine, not the latest issue, but the one from before. And it was written by Kirsten DeMello, who's going to be in our March event. She's an amazing Spiritist speaker. And she actually brought us just a very simple article entitled, the very same that we have here, giving us a glimpse about the aspect of thought and how much thought has such a deep impact in our lives. So we are going to begin with a short story. I like short stories. There was a student, a disciple, who went up to his master and he said, Master, I know that iron cuts the mountains, so iron is more powerful than mountain. Fire is capable of melting iron, which means that fire is more powerful than iron. But fire can also be controlled by water, which tells us that water is more powerful than fire. Water can also be dried up by air, so air is stronger than water. What then is more powerful than air? In which the master replied, Son, thoughts are more powerful, so therefore you be powerful by retaining positive thoughts. Giving us an idea of the power of the thought and how much thought actually has a very profound impact in our life. What are exactly, to some of us, I'm going to make this interactive, the idea that the power of thought. What is the idea that comes to our mind when we say that thought is powerful? You guys can talk. What would you say? The energy? Okay. What happens with that energy? Goes through everybody. That's actually true, because one of the things that they say here on this book is how we become attuned with other beings, whether it's incarnate or discarnate. So this is another way to look at it. But without a doubt, thought is so powerful because it actually has other consequences that follow along with it, which is the emotional consequences that come from our thinking process. And so we decided to bring some examples that we found in the book, In the Realms of Mediumship and Solar, by the Spirit Andreia Lewis, and of course the codification is always an amazing book to go to, specifically Genesis, where they talk about thoughts and they talk about fluids. And this is what we're going to kind of touch base in a very short manner. So right now we are here, and we are hopefully all thinking, because that's something that can't be stopped. It's an attribute of the Spirit. But some of us may be thinking about, what am I going to say next? Other people are kind of busy thinking about the holiday, what they need to do tomorrow, 2 weeks before Christmas time. Hello, good evening. But Allan Kardec, in the book Genesis, will tell us, there we go, that a gathering is a focal point where different thoughts radiate. So here we are at a gathering. We have gathered here today to study about Spiritism. So a gathering is a focal point where different thoughts radiate. It is like an orchestra, a core of thoughts, where each one produces a note. He adds in saying that the result is a multitude of fluidic currents and emanations. This is all of us here producing fluidic currents and emanations from which each one of us receives an impression through the spiritual sense. Just as in a musical core, each singer receives the impression of sounds through the hearing sense. So how is the Spiritist center ambiance, usually? How does it feel to come in here? When we enter this place, the music is playing softly. Usually there is a prayer that opens up the meeting or an enlightening message, and right away, since we are gathering and we are giving it a focal point to the objective that we are here, we start emanating, we start radiating the kind of energy that our friend here said. So what Allan Kardec is saying is that as much as there are harmonious and discordant sounds, there are going to be harmonious or discordant thoughts. So the Spirit Center has this kind of harmonious thoughts. It's what incarnate and discarnates are vibrating, are thinking, usually enlightening aspect of the Spiritist teaching. Spiritism is not the only body of knowledge that will study about the power of thinking and the power of thought. It's not a new idea. It's not a new realization. And as a matter of fact, we know of countless books that are available right now that talks about self-help. Some of them talk about the power that we can have in our own illnesses, diseases, our emotional impact as well. But Spiritism does have an abundant amount of information that we can gather information from that will indeed support the idea that we are co-creators, that we have the ability to create things with our thoughts. So Allan Kardec here talked about fluidic currents. What the heck? Fluidic currents, right? I was having a conversation with this gentleman, and he had an hour conversation with me, the two of us going back and forth, how the word fluidic shouldn't be used, because we think about water, right? Liquid. But that's what the Genesis, according to Spiritism, is the word that Allan Kardec chose at that time, fluidic current. God bless you. There is an entire chapter 19 on the Genesis that talks exactly about the aspect of fluidic currents, the fluids, the nature, the quality of fluids, the formation, our own fluidic body, which is called the perispirit, and we already know that, and how we actually, where we take all of this essence from. And then Allan Kardec will make it very clear to us that although we are going to study this chapter in its wholesomeness, there is still a lot that we won't know about fluids and the universal cosmic fluid. How many people here have heard about the universal cosmic fluid? Okay. Well, he will tell us that the universal cosmic fluid, whose modification and transformations comprise the innumerable variety of bodies found in the nature, and he will tell us that it's a starting point on the universal fluid, the degree of absolute purity about which nothing can give us an idea, the opposite point of its transformation into tangible matter. So basically, to simplify, he will tell us that modification of this universal cosmic fluid, while it's still in the state of etherealization of purity, form an infinite variety of distinct fluids with varying levels of purity. This is where we want to get to, because like he said, there's still so much that we can't explain and understand given our spiritual infancy, but he will tell us that these fluidic currents are in reality modification of this universal cosmic fluid. These are referred to as spiritual fluids and form the material of the spirit world. He goes on to say that the spiritual fluids, which comprise one of the states of this universal cosmic fluid, are properly stated the atmosphere for spirit beings. So I know this is very scientific and where we want to get to, and this is where it starts getting fun. I promise you, it's not so tough. We're going to understand what he's talking about, the aspect of fluidic current, what everything else here means as far as spiritual fluids are concerned. He will tell us that it's the environment where special phenomena occur that is perceptible to the spirit, sight and hearing, but beyond our corporeal senses. So a lot of the things that happen in the spirit realm are derived from the spiritual fluids, things that we cannot see with our senses unless we are a seeing medium, but that it is perceptible as if it's tangible matter for the spirit themselves. So they'll tell us that the spiritual fluid is like matter of the spiritual realm. Who here has read the book No Solar? Okay. Well, there's an entire chapter in Andreia Lewis is looking out of his window, and he starts describing buildings and flowers and trees and an entire scenario before him. And a lot of people who read about these aspects that he's talking about will say this non-solar book is science fiction. How can there be buildings and schools and different houses where Andreia Lewis is talking about? And now we're going to understand a little bit from this. They will tell us that the spirits act upon the fluids, manipulating them by combining them, dispersing them, and in other words, organizing them in such a way to create a desired appearance or form, just as we do with the solid, liquids, and gases of the material world, utilizing these spiritual fluids. So everything is done from this. The perispirit, when somebody is able to see the spirit form, it's that of the fluidic body. The appearance of their own perispirit, meaning how they choose to show themselves as. Then they have the formation of the small, materialized or not, objects. There are people who have heard about the aspect of materialization. Have you guys heard about this phenomena that had happened before? Katie King. It's really interesting. I hope that Rosanna will do a study on that and show some of the images of these materializations that they're able to perform, sometimes hand out of wax or flowers that the spirits are able to materialize, and even the buildings like we mentioned in the spirit realm as well. And because of this, the only thing that they use to be able to act upon this fluid, what they use is thought and will, the desire to do something. So thought and will are for the spirits what our hands are in the physical realm. We utilize our hands to create. They utilize their thought and the will with the spiritual fluid to do the very same thing. Finally, we are going to learn that the spiritual fluid is a vehicle of thought. That's the bottom line where we wanted to get to. How does thought travel? Through the spiritual fluid. And this is something that we are going to understand a little bit more. Because just as the fluid carries thoughts, it's the same as the air carrying sounds. Very well. In this aspect here, let's go back. In the miracles and predictions according to Spiritism in the book Genesis, this went too fast. Let's go back. There we go. Since the fluids are the vehicle for thought, thoughts act upon the fluid as sounds act upon the air. Fluid brings thoughts to us as the air brings sounds. One could truthfully say, therefore, that in these fluids are waves and rays of thoughts that crisscross one another without mixing, just as in the air there are sound waves and rays. So, who here has ever had an experience where you were able to catch someone's thoughts? You're married? Okay. Dating? Okay. Friends, okay. Oh, friends do that too. So you've had that experience? Okay, I was just going to say that because in our home, the affinity between my husband and I has gotten to a point where he actually has called me a witch, because I'm able to catch what he's thinking. And of course, we're talking about this fluidic waves and rays of thoughts that are crisscrossing each other without mixing, and to the point where sometimes we are able to catch what the other is thinking. Among friends, that happens very often. Or you're just thinking about somebody and all of a sudden the phone rings and it's the other person on the other line. So there are a lot of little things that's always like, wow, how does that happen? This is how that happens. It's explained in this chapter. Very well done. So it's no wonder that Allan Kardec will tell us that because of everything that we have read here, the spirit realm is in reality a laboratory. It's an entire workshop. There is so much that happens on the other side that we are not aware here until we get there and we learn this manipulation of fluids, that he will state that it's a laboratory. And this is where we wanted to get to. Veneranda is a very high order spirit who is present in the book No Solar, which is also called Astral City. I don't know if you've heard it this way. So she actually is before an entire assembly of spirits, and she starts a dialogue answering some of the questions on how it is possible to have matter, to have things materialized in the spirit realm. And she says, at that moment, there are a few hundred listeners among us who are surprised by the fact that our sphere is full of forms similar to those on the planet. They will say that our world is an imperfect reflection of what exists on the other side, our reality, the spirit realm. Haven't they learned that thought is the universal language? Haven't they been told that the mental creation means nearly everything in our lives? Many, many brothers and sisters are asking questions as to why there are earth-like dwellings, utensils, and languages here. This reality shouldn't surprise anyone, however. We mustn't forget that up to this point, as far as earthly existence is concerned, we have been living in old spheres of antagonistic vibrations. Thought is the basis for all human spiritual relationships. It's such a beautiful way that she puts it there, but what she's talking about is mental creation. So if in the spirit realm they're able to create and form this, and we are spiritual beings having a physical experience, we are still creating. Although we are in the physical body, we are creating. Our mind is an energy, it's a force. Fluidically, we are creating things. So my question is, what are we creating around us? Have you guys ever had an experience where you wake up and let's say Marisa had a problem with me and she knew that she was going to see me at the Spirit Center. Here she doesn't. And then all of a sudden she's driving during the day and she's like, oh, when I see her, she starts having a dialogue with herself, what would happen. Have you guys ever had that? And all of a sudden you get all worked up, like your heart pumps. Before you know, you're flushed. And there are all kind of emotions and feelings going on. And then you see the person, nothing like that happens. What did we just do? We got all worked up for nothing. We created something that never happened. And as a matter of fact, they'll tell us that 80% of the thoughts that we have during the day does not happen. Our preoccupation, the things that we occupy our minds with sometimes are useless information, where we should be able to be doing the very opposite, making sure that what we are thinking is actually good for us. It's creating something positive around us. Andreia Lewis, in the book, Evolution in Two Worlds, it's coming out soon. It's an amazing book. I finally understand it in English. Portuguese, give up. But he refers to thoughts as mental fluids. That's what he refers to thoughts. And then he goes on to say that this fluid or mental matter has its own ponderability and specific chemoelectromagnetic properties that are defined in perfectly measurable units, similar to the periodic table of the chemical elements. Does that wow anybody? Because it wowed me when I read it. And I don't even understand the periodic table, let alone the chemical elements. But he's talking about mental matter is what Andreia Lewis is telling us. And then he goes on to say that, there we go, the particle of thought as a fluidic corpuscle is like the atom, a unity in a sense, although subdivided in diverse types, according to the quantity, the quality, the behavior, and trajectories of its components. And just as the atom is living, powerful force in its own composition, but passive before the intelligence that mobilizes it for good or for the ill, the spirit, that's the one who actually mobilizes it, that's us. The particle of thought, although alive and powerful as it flows from the spirit that produces it, is also passive before the sentiment that gives it form and nature for good or for ill. Now, we have to kind of read this again in a very slow manner, because he's talking about the aspect of quantity, quality, the behavior and trajectory of its components, the components that make up thought. And then he says that it can be passive before the intelligence. That's us, the spirit. The spirit is the one that is endowed with this intelligence that can mobilize it for good or for the ill. Or it can be alive and powerful as well as it flows from the spirit that produces it, giving the sentiment, the form, and the nature as well. This is how we can start understanding why the topic chosen, your mind, your life, and what we are essentially creating around us. Nobody can actually say anymore that to think is not to create. And then he goes on to say that a thought, this is actually Kardec in the book Genesis, as thought creates fluidic images, it is reflected in the perispiritual envelope as in a mirror. There it takes a body and photographs itself somehow. Now, here's this guy. He's in a very doubtful position here. He's caught up in a moment with a young lady. He doesn't know if he strangles and hates her or if he's in love with her. A very passionate type of love that we can see going on here. So as impassive as his physical body may be at that moment, in reality, his fluidic body goes into action by the means of the thought, reproducing everything that he wishes to create. So fluidically, he's actually executing the motion. Fluidically, through his thought and through his will, he's actually creating the situation that he wishes to accomplish. Now, he hasn't acted yet, but his will is going to determine the kind of action that he's going to take. How many crime of passion happens from people who said they lost their mind? For a second, they couldn't think clear, and then all of a sudden, they reacted. And here's where the book, Thought and Life, on the chapter 2, dictated by Emmanuel, will tell us something about the subdivisions of our mind. He will tell us that we have somewhat of a large office subdivided into different departments. And then he will tell us that in our mind, we have the department of desire, where there are purposes and aspirations that work to stimulate us into different activities. There is a department of intelligence, which expands the evolutionary and cultural assets as we evolve. There is the department of imagination, slowly joining together the riches of ideas and sensitivity. There is the department of memory, where we archive every experiences that we have here, and other departments that are not yet defined that functions the soul. But then he will say that there's a very specific department, and that's the one that regulates all of the other ones, which is the department of the will. Now, the will is a pretty interesting character, he will say, because in reality, he will tell us that the will is the decisive factor. It's the power push button of all of the other departments that exist in our mind. And he says, without the will, desire may err and go astray. So we have the desires. If we don't have the will to try to manipulate it on the good intentions, it's going to go astray. It says also that it may incur debts requiring centers of sufferings and restitution. The intelligence may be caught in the vices of criminality. Imagination may create dangerous monsters of darkness, and memory, although faithful to its function of registering what it receives, in conformity with the destination given to by nature, may fall into deplorable neglect and inefficiency. Only the will is sufficiently strong to sustain the harmony of the spirit. So it's a pretty powerful lesson on this chapter because it's essentially talking about what we are talking about here. Some people don't pay attention to what they think and how they feel. And all of a sudden, I lost my mind. I didn't think about what I said. In reality, we did. It's just that we put that into action by not being able to control our will. So we allowed ourselves to create that for ourselves as well. They say that the thought creates the image of the victim. The entire scenario is painted like a picture just as it exists in the person's mind. Now, they tell us that the spirits are able to see our thoughts. Can we understand why now they're able to see our thoughts? Right? I mean, if they are able to tell our desires and our intentions and what we are imagining and thinking for ourselves, then certainly if our thoughts are mental matter, then something like this here can attract like-mindedness from the spirit realm. The cases of obsessions is pretty clear. If this individual here has a tendency of being aggressive and he's playing out this kind of scenario in his mind and he's attracting by his emotions and his feeling and his thoughts spirits that vibrate in the same manner that he does, it may become potentialized and strengthened because of the influences around him. And then we can have an idea of how this works as well. This is why the high order spirit Veneranda in the book No Solar will tell us that thought is a living force everywhere. It's the creative atmosphere enveloping the Father and His children, the cause and the effects in the universal home. Through thought, human beings become angels on their way to heaven or diabolical masterminds on their own way to hell. And this is something here that I thought was pretty interesting because it says that the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of a hell or a hell of a heaven. Makes a lot of sense. Sometimes we feel that we are incarcerated in such a situation that we feel like we are in hell. Things around us just doesn't work. They do not work. And as soon as we shift our ideas and thinking, we are able to make something positive again. How many times we shift in and out of heaven and hell on our daily lives? We can start questioning about this as well. And this is why they'll tell us that we have to be mindful about our thoughts. How important it is for us to be vigilant about how we are thinking. Not in a judgmental way. Carlos Campetti is a great speaker, and he was giving us an idea one time. He said he was in a line in the bakery, and there was this really strong, muscular guy in front of him with a baby. And in his mind, he thought like smacking the baby. Like, where did that thought come from? He's a loving man. Where do some of these thoughts come from? And it says we shouldn't fight and try to know the thought. We should try to evaluate where did that come from, analyze it, and slowly try to replace it with something positive. Meaning, we don't need to be so tough on ourselves when we are having some kind of weird thinking or something crosses our mind that is not in accordance with how we're feeling at that time. In reality, it's an educative process. And they'll tell us also about not only the moral aspect of Spiritism, giving us a liberating key to try to establish a better thinking faculty for ourselves, but how thinking also impacts our physical and emotional well-being as well. So here's a question that the Gospel according to Spiritism poses for us. Suppose, there we go, there's the curtains, yeah, I like that. Does one suffer the consequences of an evil thought if it is not followed by an effect? What do you guys think? It's an interesting question. Let's say I thought about stealing the cash box from the Kardecian Studies Society of Florida. If I don't do it, am I still going to suffer the consequences for that ill-intentioned thought? I like ill-intention better than evil. What do you guys think? Huh? Well, they'll tell us that every ill-intentioned thought results from the soul's imperfections. So we're going to have them because we're still imperfect. That's okay. But then they'll tell us that depending on the desire to purify ourselves, the efforts that we make to try to become better, it actually becomes an opportunity for advancement if we don't carry through with it and we make an effort not to do it. But on the other hand, if the action wasn't followed, if we didn't act through with our thinking because we missed the opportunity to do it, then yes, we suffer the consequences from that ill-intentioned thought. So if the cash box is there, but I don't grab it because there's 1,000 people around it, I'm going to suffer the consequences from that ill-intentioned thought. But if there's nobody around and I make an agreement, I take that opportunity not to act upon my ill-intentioned desire, then yes, I'm going to get a star, like kids do in school. So let's see where we are in the scale. Are we people who do not even conceive the thought of an evil? If we're here, we've already made progress. Those to whom the thought occurs, but who reject it and are on their way to making progress, or those who have such a thought and take pleasure in it and are still indwelt by ill intent and all its strength. Where are we? Who are we? Right? It's an interesting kind of balance that they give us here to see where we fit in, because we can't stop thinking. We won't. It's the faculty of the spirit. And because we are still spiritually, we're still infants, we're still children here, the fact that the progress is gradual, that it doesn't happen overnight, and we are still going to go through all of this, we are going to think sometimes things that are not so great. So I'm going to guess that everybody's in this middle part here, right? We think it's okay. Sometimes we are in the transit, in the traffic, somebody cuts us off, and we feel like going after them and cutting him off too, right? Sometimes we actually do that. But if we are able to reject it and try to replace it, maybe say the person probably is in a hurry because there's somebody ill at home, or maybe he hasn't eaten all day and he's starving, something that we can exercise to try to replace that thought. It's something that is going to help us and offer an opportunity for advancement as well. Another question that we have to think about is if we're thinking and creating and we are attracting like-minded spirits. Here's a question from 459 of the Spirits book that a lot of people already know. Do spirits influence our own thoughts and actions? And the answer is yes, so much so that very frequently they guide us. Now, a lot of people think of this question and they say, oh my God, I'm so afraid. But what about the good spirits that also influence us in trying to do something good? Sometimes we are a tool of enlightenment in the hands of the good spirits and we don't know. Because we have opened the bridge for communication where they are able to establish this connection with us and influence our thoughts. And how amazing that is to be able to work with them and be this kind of tool on this earthly existence that is so hard at times. So we have to be able also to distinguish whether it's our own thoughts or if it's something from above or from below that we are getting in tune with, and try to make that distinction as well. Because if we are able to do that distinction, we are going to find out who's accompanying us. Who's accompanying me? Who's beside me? Who's behind me? Who's following me? And that's something. Say it again? Okay. All right. Now, there's a text that we wanted to bring from the book, Action and Reaction, because they will tell us also that because of the aspect of feeling and knowing that to think is to create, it's an energy, it's a creative force, it's all of the fluidic mental waves that we have here, they will tell us that we shouldn't only be worried about that here in our physical existence. In reality, they'll tell us that we have to be mindful because of what may happen to us upon this incarnation. How many people have read the book Action and Reaction? Here's another one, good one to read, Action and Reaction. So great, because there are so many examples of how the spirits find themselves and what they create for themselves in the spirit realm. And some of the situations are pretty harsh. So let's see a paragraph here, which I'm going to say, excuse me, and read to you guys from Silas. And he'll explain to Andreia Lewis the following. He says, let's picture our thoughts as a living and active force whose speed is faster than light. Emitted by us, it inevitably returns to us. Kind of like a boomerang, we can say that. We throw it, comes back to us, compelling us to live of our own accord in its wave of created forms, which naturally fix themselves in our minds when fed by the fuel of our desires or attention. Hence the vital need for us to always keep ourselves in the noblest ideas and purest purposes of life due to the fact that energies attract other energies of the same kind. If this boomerang comes back, it's bringing back other same forces that are vibrating in the same manner, which is a negative one or a positive one. He says, when we dwell on vices or darkness, the mental forces that we exteriorize, that we throw out, returns to our mind. Forces which are reanimated and intensified by the elements in tune with them. So here's where we're having an idea of how strong it gets. We reinforce the bars of the prison in which we thoughtlessly remain, making our soul a closed world where the voices and the images of our own thoughts combined with the suggestions of those who are in tune with our behavior follows us in the aftermath of life. So there are spirits, I don't know if you guys have seen the movies, The Sixth Sense. Ah, okay, good. There's a part there the little boy says they only see what they wish to see. You guys remember that? That movie is pretty amazing with spirits' teachings, because it's basically saying what we are saying. The spirits create for themselves the world in which they live in. And this we actually do here. We are creating for our discarnation the reality that we are going to live in. And this is why they always call upon us to have noble ideas and good readings and good thoughts and trying to enlighten ourselves so that we don't create the hell that we might eventually create for us upon discarnating. Heaven or hell is inside of us. It's not a distinct place in the spirit realm. He will say, this is why once the physical body disappears in the phenomenon of death, everybody's going to die. So when this happens, the spirit moving in a vehicle more plastic and more subject to the influences can spend a long time as a prisoner of its constructive creations or remain in vast regions of sufferings and illusions, as it's so greatly explained by the book Action and Reaction. Andreia Lewis brings us that. So Joana de Angelis in the book Happy Life tells us that. She says, our minds are like powerful dynamos, generators. And Silas will tell us the same thing. He says that our thoughts acting like waves that travel faster than light, and that every mind being a dynamo generating creative force, will explain that the good may be the expansion of the light and evil is a condensation of that darkness. And when we lose ourselves in cruelty towards others, our thoughts, which are waves of subtle energy, permeating places and people, situations, and matter, affect our memory, act and react upon each other in closed circuit, always bringing back to us the unpleasant feelings caused by our contact with our unfortunate deeds. So, again, we're talking about the aspect of the boomerang. We throw the thought out, it comes back to us, reacting, acting, and intensifying that kind of thought that we threw out. So, Joana de Angelis will remind us that we have to cultivate prayer a lot. This is another aspect. People don't pray every day. Sometimes they only pray when they feel they're struggling or there's something going on that shouldn't be. And so she tells us that prayer are unspoken words that reaches the higher spheres, calling this kind of boomerang that we're throwing, bringing like-minded energy, good uplifting energy to try to support us and assist us as well. With Spiritism, we learn all of this, and we know that it's not easy to cultivate prayer and be vigilant and be careful, but she always will tell us that we also have spirits that are following us. And when we make an effort to make changes on how we are thinking and feeling, they actually learn from us as well, especially those that follow us from previous incarnations. Paul, the apostle, was already aware of this, because he will tell us that since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, we need to leave everything behind that hinders us. Meaning, if this big, great cloud of witnesses are spirits, that we should make an effort to make good deeds, good actions, trying to leave everything that's still stalling us in our spiritual progress. And this is where the idea of enlightening ourselves comes from. And so, just to finalize, Emmanuel will remind us that we are not here on planet Earth to be kidding or joking or on vacation, although Miami is great. Miami Beach is nice. Marizinha, come again. And you guys can come too. They'll tell us that in reality, we are all on our own individual journey with a destiny aimed at the stages of greater progress. That's why we're here. We can have a good time. We can have a good life. But we have to pay more attention to the virtues that we haven't acquired yet, as opposed to feeding and potentializing the kind of vices that make us actually create our world with our thoughts. On this great pilgrimage, we are instruments of the forces with which we are in tune. We are all mediums within our own mental field. Of course, we associate ourselves with edifying energies when we allow our thoughts to flow towards the higher life, or with disturbing and depressing forces as long as we're still enslaved to the shadows of primeval and tormented life. And he will remind us, this is kind of a large text, that we need to keep Christ in our hearts and minds, as to not allow ourselves to become disoriented or lost in this kind of pilgrimage and journey that we are here. Without the notion of responsibility or the devotion of the practice of the good, without the love of studying. Studying is necessary so that we can enlighten our minds about what we are supposed to do. Without a persevering effort to try to diminish, right? That's the word, diminish, the kind of vices that we still have inside. He will tell us of our own personal moral education. This liberating pilgrimage toward the higher life is impossible. And that we must understand that according to the rays we emit, or our own spiritual dwelling will rise within the wave of thoughts preferred by our souls. So we are going to leave the study today asking, what is the preference of our soul so far? Because if you already know what's good, we should make that persevering effort to maintain it and be vigilant and understanding and mindful of these creating forces, unless we like the other kind of energies. Then we can allow ourselves to stagnate too until a limit comes about and we choose to make a decision and an alternation in our lives. So this is our study for today. Do we open for comments? Yes, comments, questions? Okay, thank you, Raya. Thank you, guys. Thank you for your patience with me.
No, we thank you.